The velvet box felt like an anchor in Elijah Mercer's palm as he stared at the computer screen. The Tiffany diamond ring, a 3-carat oval with a platinum band, gleamed under his apartment lights as he uploaded the final photo to the auction site. Starting bid, $15,000, he typed, his fingers trembling slightly. The ring had cost him $32,000, nearly his entire savings at the time. He'd been so certain then. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Honey, it's been 2 months. Have you heard anything from Vanessa?" Elijah ignored it, focusing instead on completing the listing. The description box glared at him, empty and waiting. What could he possibly write? Engagement ring, never worn, belongs to the woman who disappeared without a trace 7 days before our wedding. His cursor hovered over the submit button. In the reflection of his laptop screen, he barely recognized himself, hollow cheeks, unkempt beard, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. He clicked submit and whispered to the empty apartment, "Goodbye, Vanessa." His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "Hello." His voice cracked. "Is this Elijah Mercer?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "Yes. My name is Detective Isabel Reyes. We need to talk about Vanessa Churn." 6 months earlier. Earth to Elijah. Marcus waved his hand in front of Elijah's face, breaking his trance. "Dude, you've been staring at that engagement ring catalog for 45 minutes. They sat in the corner of Café Noir, their usual Saturday morning spot where the espresso came strong and the jazz played soft. Elijah was 34, a structural engineer with careful eyes and a meticulousness that extended from his building designs to his precisely trimmed beard. "Sorry," Elijah said, closing the catalog. "I just wanted to be perfect." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Perfect is the enemy of good, my friend. Vanessa would say yes if you proposed with a ring pop." Elijah smiled at the thought of Vanessa, brilliant, spirited Vanessa, who managed a high-end art gallery downtown and who'd swept into his life 2 years ago with hurricane force, appending his careful plans and predictable routines. "I know, but this is Vanessa we're talking about. She deserves perfect." "When are you planning to pop the question?" Marcus asked, signaling the waitress for a refill. "Next weekend. I've booked that coastal cottage she loved in Montauk. Sunset proposal on the beach, private chef for dinner after. Textbook romantic. She'll love it." "I hope so," Elijah said, his mind already racing ahead to wedding venues, honeymoon destinations. "You know what's weird? In the 2 years we've been together, she's never once mentioned marriage or kids or any of that. I'm flying blind here." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Maybe she's just not the traditional type? You guys have talked about the future though, right?" "Of course," Elijah said quickly, but something nagged at him. Their conversations about the future had always been vague, nebulous. Vanessa redirecting when things got too concrete. He'd attributed it to her artistic temperament, living in the moment rather than 5 steps ahead like him. "Well, here's to taking the plunge." Marcus raised his coffee mug. Elijah clinked mugs with him. "To the plunge. Marry me." Elijah was on one knee, the waves crashing behind him, the setting sun painting the sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold. The ring box was open in his trembling hand. Inside, the diamond caught the dying light and fractured it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Vanessa stood frozen, her dark hair whipping around her face in the ocean breeze, her eyes wide with. Was it surprise? Fear? "Elijah," she whispered, and for one horrible moment, he thought she would say no. But then she threw her arms around him, nearly toppling them both into the sand. "Yes," she breathed into his neck. "Yes, I'll marry you." Relief flooded through him as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, just as the jeweler had promised when Elijah had secretly borrowed one of Vanessa's rings to determine the size. Later, over champagne and lobster in the cottage's candlelit dining room, Vanessa kept glancing at her ring, turning her hand this way and that to watch the diamond sparkle. "It's too much," she said, but her smile was radiant. "Nothing's too much for you," Elijah replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. I mean it, she insisted, something serious flickering behind her eyes. This must have cost you a fortune. Don't worry about that, he said, squeezing her hand. I've been saving. She nodded, but he noticed she'd barely touched her food, and the champagne in her glass remained untouched. Everything okay? He asked. Vanessa seemed to snap back from somewhere far away. Of course. Just overwhelmed. In the best way possible. Her smile returned, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. So, when were you thinking? For the wedding? I was thinking fall, maybe October. That's only 6 months away, she said, her voice careful. Too soon? No, it's perfect, she said quickly. Small wedding though, right? Nothing too elaborate. Whatever you want, Elijah promised, relief washing over him again. Small, big, Elvis Chapel in Vegas. I just want you. Vanessa laughed, and this time it was genuine. The sound Elijah had fallen in love with. I draw the line at Elvis, she said, finally picking up her champagne flute. To us. They clinked glasses. To us, Elijah echoed. When they made love that night, there was an intensity to Vanessa he'd never felt before, a desperation in her kisses, in the way she clung to him afterward, her face buried in his chest. If he'd known then what he knew now, he might have recognized it for what it was. Goodbye. Wedding planning consumed the next few months. Vanessa approached it with a surprising attention to detail, venue scouting, meeting with florists, caterers, photographers. They settled on a boutique hotel in the Berkshires, a place with stone fireplaces and weathered wooden beams that struck the perfect balance between rustic and elegant. What do you think about these for the centerpieces? Vanessa held up her phone, showing a photo of white peonies mixed with eucalyptus. They were in their apartment, technically Elijah's apartment, though Vanessa had moved in 6 months into their relationship. It was Sunday morning, and they were still in pajamas, coffee mugs in hand, wedding planning strewn across the dining table. Beautiful, Elijah said, though flowers all looked more or less the same to him. He was about to return to his task of addressing save-the-date cards when something on Vanessa's laptop screen caught his eye. What's that? Vanessa quickly minimized the window. Just work stuff. On a Sunday? The art world never sleeps, she said lightly. A potential buyer for that Rothko piece. Elijah nodded, but something about her quick movement, the defensive note in her voice, set off a faint alarm bell. He pushed it aside. Trust had never been an issue between them. Have you talked to your parents yet? He asked instead, returning to the save-the-dates. I need their address for the invitation. A shadow passed over Vanessa's face. Not yet. I will. Vanessa's relationship with her parents was complicated. That much Elijah knew. They lived in Singapore, where Vanessa had grown up before coming to the U.S. for college. She rarely spoke of them, and in the 2 years they'd been together, she'd only called them a handful of times, always brief conversations in Mandarin that left her quiet and withdrawn afterward. They should know you're getting married, Elijah said gently. They will, Vanessa replied, her voice tight. Just not yet. Another alarm bell, faint but persistent. But again, Elijah chose to let it go. Everyone had family complications, right? The weeks passed in a whirlwind of decisions. The band was booked, the menu selected, the dress purchased, though Elijah wasn't allowed to see it, of course. 120 guests had RSVP'd yes. Everything was falling into place. Until it wasn't. 1 week before the wedding, Elijah woke to an empty bed. This wasn't unusual. Vanessa often rose before him, especially on weekdays. He could hear the shower running in the bathroom. He stretched, allowing himself a moment of pure contentment. In 7 days, Vanessa would be his wife. They'd fly to Bali the day after the wedding for 2 weeks of honeymoon bliss. Life was good. The shower shut off, and a few minutes later, Vanessa emerged wrapped in a towel, her wet hair slicked back. Morning, beautiful, Elijah said, propping himself up on one elbow. Vanessa smiled, but there was something strained about it. Morning. Everything okay? Just wedding jitters, I guess, she said, turning away to rummage through the dresser. Elijah got up and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Cold feet. She leaned back against him.
No.
It's all becoming very real. That's the idea, he murmured, kissing her neck. Vanessa turned in his arms to face him. Elijah, you know I love you, right? Something in her tone made his stomach tighten. Of course. And I love you. She studied his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, like she was trying to memorize his features. I need to run some last-minute wedding errands today. I might be late. Need help? No, she said quickly. It's just bride things. Elijah nodded. Okay. I'll be at work until 6, then heading to my tux fitting with Marcus. Dinner around 8. Perfect, Vanessa said, standing on tiptoes to kiss him. It was a lingering kiss, deeper than their usual morning goodbye. When they broke apart, Elijah laughed. What was that for? No reason, she said, her eyes shining with what he now recognized as tears. I just love you, that's all. An hour later, as Elijah sat in traffic on his way to work, his phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Thank you for loving me. For everything. He smiled and texted back, always. See you tonight, almost wife. She didn't respond. She never would again. By midnight, Elijah had called Vanessa's phone 27 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. He'd texted her 45 times. No response. He paced the apartment, his mind spinning through scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Car accident. Mugging gone wrong. Medical emergency. But there was no record of Vanessa Chin being admitted to any hospital in the city. No police reports. No accidents matching her description. Marcus arrived at 2 a.m., bleary-eyed but alert. She's still not answering? Elijah shook his head, his hands shaking as he attempted to make coffee. Something's wrong, Marcus. This isn't like her. Have you checked her credit cards? Phone records. We don't have joint accounts, Elijah said, the realization suddenly strange to him. They'd been about to get married, and yet they'd never combined finances, never even discussed it really. Marcus sat at the kitchen island, rubbing his face. What about her work? Have you called the gallery? Closed on Mondays. I'll go first thing tomorrow. Friends? Co-workers? Elijah stared at him. I don't know many of her friends, he admitted, the fact suddenly glaring. Vanessa had always kept her work life and personal life separate. There were gallery events he'd attended, colleagues he'd met briefly, but no one he could call in the middle of the night. Let's go through her things, Marcus suggested gently. There might be something, some clue. Elijah nodded numbly. They started with her desk, a small writing table by the living room window where she sometimes worked from home. The surface was neat, organized. A leather portfolio containing gallery paperwork. A cup of pens. A framed photo of Elijah and Vanessa at the coast last summer, both laughing, windswept, and happy. The drawers yielded nothing unusual. Work contracts. Art catalogs. A spare phone charger. Her laptop. Marcus asked. She took it with her, Elijah said. She always does. They moved to the bedroom, to the dresser where Vanessa kept her clothes. Everything seemed in order. Neatly folded sweaters, organized rows of socks and underwear. But something nagged at Elijah. He opened the closet, scanning Vanessa's side. Her clothes hung in color-coordinated sections, shoes lined up below. Nothing seemed amiss until he noticed an empty space on the rack, a gap where several items should have been. And then it hit him. Her suitcase, the small carry-on she used for weekend trips, was gone from its usual spot on the closet shelf. Her suitcase is missing, he said, his voice hollow. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Elijah. And her passport, Elijah continued, moving to the bedside table drawer where Vanessa kept important documents. He yanked it open. Empty. Her passport is gone. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Vanessa hadn't been taken. She had left. No, Elijah said, more to himself than to Marcus. There must be an explanation. Maybe she had a family emergency. Her parents. He grabbed his phone, scrolling frantically through his contacts. He'd met Vanessa's parents only via video chat, brief and awkward conversations where Vanessa had translated his English into Mandarin. He didn't have their contact information, had never needed it. Her gallery, Elijah said suddenly. They must have her emergency contacts on file. I'll go first thing tomorrow. Marcus watched him with worried eyes. Elijah, I think you should consider the possibility that. Don't. Elijah cut him off, his voice sharp. Don't say it. But as dawn broke and Vanessa's side of the bed remained empty, the truth began to settle, like a stone in Elijah's stomach. The woman he loved, the woman he was supposed to marry in 6 days, had vanished from his life without a word. Mr. Mercer? I'm Sophie Wu, the assistant director. Please have a seat. The Archer Gallery was sleek and minimalist. White walls, polished concrete floors, art pieces displayed with careful spacing and dramatic lighting. Even at 10 a.m., just as they opened, the place hummed with a quiet, moneyed energy. Thank you for seeing me, Elijah said, perching on the edge of a leather chair in what appeared to be Sophie's office. I'm looking for Vanessa. Vanessa Chen? She's your events manager. Something flashed across Sophie's face, recognition, followed quickly by discomfort. Yes, I know Vanessa. She's missing, Elijah said, leaning forward. She didn't come home last night. I'm worried something might have happened to her. Sophie looked down at her desk, arranging and rearranging a stack of business cards. Mr. Mercer, Vanessa no longer works here. The words hit Elijah like a physical blow. What? Since when? She submitted her resignation 2 weeks ago. Her last day was Friday. 2 weeks. While they were finalizing wedding details, while she was approving flower arrangements and cake flavors, Vanessa had been planning her exit. Did she say why? Where she was going? Elijah asked, his voice strangled. Sophie's discomfort was palpable now. She mentioned relocating, but didn't specify where. I assumed you knew. Weren't you too? Engaged, Elijah supplied. We're supposed to get married this Saturday. Pity replaced discomfort in Sophie's eyes. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Did she leave any forwarding information? A new address, phone number? No, nothing like that. She was very private about her plans. Was she acting strangely in the weeks before she left? Did she seem upset, nervous? Sophie hesitated. Not upset, exactly. More resolved. Like someone who had made a difficult decision. Elijah's head swam. None of this made sense. Vanessa had been planning their wedding, had been excited about it, hadn't she? What about her friends here? Was she close with any coworkers? Anyone who might know where she went? Vanessa was friendly with everyone, but not particularly close to anyone, Sophie said carefully. She kept her personal life separate. A pattern was emerging, one that Elijah had been too blind, too in love to see. Vanessa had compartmentalized her life. Work separate from personal, family separate from everything else. He'd known this about her, had even admired her independence, never questioning why she kept these walls so high, so impenetrable. There is one thing, Sophie added, opening her desk drawer. She left this for you. Asked me to mail it. But since you're here? She handed him a small, white envelope. Elijah's name was written on the front in Vanessa's elegant script. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single piece of cardstock, expensive, textured paper that Vanessa favored for her personal correspondence. And 5 words, written in her careful hand. I'm sorry. Don't look for me. No explanation. No goodbye. Just 5 words that demolished the life Elijah thought they were building. That's it, he whispered, turning the card over, searching for more. That's all she left. I'm sorry, Sophie said again, genuine compassion in her voice. If it helps, I don't think she did this lightly. She seemed torn. It didn't help. Nothing helped. Elijah stood, the room suddenly too small, the air too thin. Thank you for your time. Mr. Mercer, Sophie called as he reached the door. For what it's worth, I always thought you two were well matched. She lit up when she talked about you. The words were meant to be kind, but they twisted in Elijah like a knife. If Vanessa had loved him, truly loved him, How could she have walked away without explanation? How could she have planned an elaborate exit while simultaneously planning their wedding? Outside the gallery, Elijah leaned against the building, gulping in the spring air. His phone buzzed, Marcus, checking in. He ignored it, his mind racing. Vanessa had resigned 2 weeks ago. She'd packed a suitcase, taken her passport. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated.
But why?
What had changed? He thought back over the past month, searching for signs, for clues he might have missed. Vanessa had seemed distracted at times, yes, but he'd attributed that to wedding stress. She'd been on her phone more than usual, but again, wedding planning required coordination. Had there been other signs? Late nights at work that might not have been work at all. Unexplained absences?
No.
Vanessa had been present, engaged in their life together. She'd been the one to choose their honeymoon destination, had spent hours researching the perfect villa in Bali. She'd written her vows 3 weeks ago, had told him she was practicing them in the mirror. Who did that if they were planning to leave? Unless it had all been an elaborate act. Unless the Vanessa he thought he knew had never existed at all. The next 2 days passed in a blur of increasingly desperate efforts. Elijah filed a missing persons report, but the detective who took his statement seemed skeptical after learning about the resignation letter and the note. Sounds like she left voluntarily, sir, the officer said, not unkindly. We can keep the report on file, but without evidence of foul play. Elijah checked their credit card statements, looking for clues, recent purchases, flight bookings. But Vanessa had always maintained her own accounts, insisting on paying her share of expenses. He had no access. He called the airlines, one after another, asking about passenger manifests. Without a court order or proof of emergency, none would divulge whether Vanessa Chen had boarded a flight. He even drove to her old apartment, a small studio she'd kept on after moving in with him, supposedly to store excess furniture and art supplies. The landlord informed him that Vanessa had terminated her lease a month ago, had cleared everything out over a weekend when Elijah had been visiting his parents in Connecticut. It was as if she'd systematically erased herself from his life, cutting ties one by one while maintaining a perfect facade of normalcy. By the third day, a kind of numb acceptance began to settle over Elijah. Vanessa was gone. She had chosen to leave. No amount of searching would bring her back if she didn't want to be found. And then Detective Isabel Reyes called. Tell me again when you last saw Ms. Chen, Detective Reyes said, her pen poised over a small notebook. They sat in Elijah's apartment, which felt cavernous without Vanessa's presence. Detective Reyes was mid-40s, with sharp eyes and the careful, measured movements of someone who missed nothing. Monday morning, Elijah said, his voice flat from repeating the story too many times. A week ago, she said she had wedding errands to run. That was the last time I saw her. And the text message came later that morning? Elijah nodded, pulling up the message on his phone. Thank you for loving me.
For everything.
Detective Reyes studied it, her expression unreadable. Mr. Mercer, how much do you know about Vanessa's background? Before she came to New York? She grew up in Singapore. Her parents still live there. She came to the U.S. for college, RASD, art history. She has dual citizenship. And before Singapore? Elijah frowned. What do you mean? Detective Reyes set down her notebook. Vanessa Chen isn't her real name. The words didn't make sense at first, like they were in a language Elijah didn't speak. What? Her real name is Lin Wei. She was born in Beijing, not Singapore. She came to the United States 12 years ago on a student visa under that name. Vanessa Chen is an identity she assumed approximately 5 years ago. The room seemed to tilt. That's impossible, Elijah said. I've seen her passport. Her driver's license. She has a social security number, for God's sake. All under the name Vanessa Chen, yes, Detective Reyes agreed. All seemingly legitimate documents. Which is why this case has now crossed over to federal jurisdiction. Federal? I don't understand. Mr. Mercer, I'm part of a joint task force with the FBI, investigating a sophisticated identity theft and fraud ring operating out of China. We believe your fiancé may have been involved. Fraud? Elijah echoed, the word hollow in his mouth. Vanessa isn't a criminal. She's an art curator. She has a master's degree. Does she? Detective Reyes asked gently. Have you seen her diplomas? Met any of her college friends? Elijah opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He realized. Vanessa had always spoken of her education as something in the past, something completed and moved beyond. And friends from college? She'd mentioned a roommate once or twice, but no one she'd kept in touch with. This doesn't make sense, he insisted. If Vanessa or Lynn or whoever she is was some kind of criminal, what was she doing with me? We were about to get married. Detective Reyes's expression softened slightly. That's what we're trying to determine. It may be that her relationship with you is genuine, separate from her other activities. What activities? What exactly are you accusing her of? We believe the organization she works for specializes in art fraud, specifically creating and selling forgeries of contemporary masterpieces. They target private collectors, people with money and prestige, but perhaps not the expertise to detect sophisticated fakes. And you think Vanessa was part of this? Because she works at an art gallery? Worked, Detective Reyes corrected. And yes, her position would have given her access to exactly the kind of clientele this organization targets. Wealthy collectors, people looking to make statement purchases. Elijah shook his head, still unable to reconcile this version of Vanessa with the woman he loved. If what you're saying is true, why did she leave now? Why not months ago or years ago? That's what we'd like to know, Detective Reyes said, leaning forward. Did anything change recently? Any new pressures, new circumstances? We were getting married, Elijah said flatly. That was the change. Could that have been a catalyst? Marriage would have meant more scrutiny, joint tax returns, shared financial records. The implication stung. Had Vanessa been running from marriage itself, from the transparency it would require? Or had she been running from exposure, from the risk that her supposed criminal activities would come to light? There's one more thing, Detective Reyes added, her tone careful. We have reason to believe Ms. Chun Linwei left the country on Tuesday, on a flight to Hong Kong. Hong Kong? Not Singapore. Not Singapore, Detective Reyes confirmed. We believe that was part of her cover story. She likely has no family in Singapore at all. Elijah stood abruptly, unable to sit still under the weight of these revelations. I need a minute. Detective Reyes nodded, her eyes following him as he moved to the window, staring out at the city that suddenly seemed foreign and hostile. Everything he believed about Vanessa was a lie. Her name, her background, perhaps even her feelings for him. He'd built his life around a phantom, a carefully constructed fiction. Why are you telling me all this? He asked finally, turning back to the detective. Aren't these details confidential in an ongoing investigation? Normally, yes, Detective Reyes admitted. But we need your help, Mr. Mercer. You knew her, the version of herself she showed you. You might have information that could help us locate her and the others involved in this operation. You want me to help you arrest the woman I love, Elijah said, the bitterness sharp in his voice. I want you to help us understand who she really is, Detective Reyes corrected gently. And maybe in the process, get some answers for yourself. Don't you want to know why she left? Why she created this elaborate persona? Why she chose you? The questions pierced him like arrows, each one finding a vulnerable spot. Of course he wanted answers. He deserved them after what Vanessa Lynn had done. What do you need from me? He asked finally. Access to any communications between you and Ms. Chen. Permission to search the apartment for evidence. And your recollection of any conversations, any details about her work, her contacts, particularly in the art world. Elijah nodded slowly. I'll help. But I want something in return. We can't make deals, Mr. Mercer. I'm not asking for immunity or money, Elijah clarified. I just want to be there when you find her. I want to look her in the eye when she explains why she did this. Detective Reyes studied him for a long moment. I can't promise that, but I'll note your request. It would have to be enough. Elijah extended his hand. Where do we start? 3 months later. Hong Kong in summer was a furnace, Heat rising from the pavement in visible waves, humidity clinging to skin like a second layer. Elijah tugged at his collar, feeling sweat trickle down his back as he followed Detective Reyes through the crowded market street. "Are you sure this is the place?" he asked, voice low despite the din of commerce around them. Reyes nodded, her eyes scanning the storefronts. "Our contact confirmed. She's been working out of a studio above that tea shop for the past month." After Vanessa's disappearance, Elijah had thrown himself into the investigation, partly to distract from the pain, partly driven by a desperate need for answers. He'd gone through every email, every text, every photo. He'd made lists of names Vanessa had mentioned, places she'd talked about, clients she'd referred to. Most had led nowhere. But one name had triggered recognition with the FBI team, Wei Liang, supposedly a collector from Taiwan who had purchased several pieces from Vanessa's gallery over the past year. All the transactions had been conducted remotely. No one at the gallery had ever met him in person. The FBI believed Wei Liang was Vanessa's handler, possibly even a relative given the shared surname with her true identity. He was their link to the larger organization, and tracking his financial movements had eventually led them here, to a nondescript street in Kowloon. Elijah hadn't expected to be included in the operation. But 3 weeks ago, Detective Reyes had called with an unexpected proposal. The Hong Kong authorities were planning a raid on what they believed was the forgery operations main studio. They needed someone who could positively identify Lin Wei, Vanessa, someone whose presence might catch her off guard. They needed Elijah. "Remember the plan," Reyes said now, stopping at a corner. "You stay with Officer Chun at all times. This is just identification, not confrontation. We need you to confirm it's her, nothing more." Elijah nodded, though his heart raced at the prospect of seeing Vanessa again. What would he feel? Anger? Relief? Love? Still, despite everything? "The local team is already in position," Reyes continued. "We move on my signal." They made their way to a narrow alley beside the tea shop where Officer Chen waited, a plainclothes detective with the Hong Kong police. He nodded at them, his expression serious. "Second floor, third window from the left," he said in accented English. 3 individuals inside. 1 female, 2 males. Elijah's gaze traveled up to the window, ordinary, unassuming, with a faded red curtain partially drawn. Was Vanessa behind that window right now? Was she thinking of him at all, or had she already erased him from her mind just as thoroughly as she'd erased herself from his life? "Teams in position," Officer Chen reported, touching his earpiece. "Ready on your command." Detective Reyes looked at Elijah. "Last chance to back out. Once we go in, there's no turning back." But Elijah had already come too far to turn back now. "I'm ready." Reyes nodded and spoke into radio. "All units move in.
Now."
Everything happened with startling speed after that. Officers appeared from both ends of the alley. The street entrance to the building was breached. Shouts echoed from above, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Elijah followed Officer Chen and Detective Reyes up a narrow staircase, staying behind them as instructed. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. They emerged into a large, open studio space. Canvases lined the walls, some finished, some in progress. The air smelled of oil paint and turpentine. 2 men were already in handcuffs, being read their rights by Hong Kong officers in Cantonese. And then Elijah saw her. Vanessa stood by the window, her hands raised, an officer beside her. She wore simple clothes, black pants, a gray t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, none of the carefully curated style he'd known her to favor. She hadn't seen him yet. Her expression was composed, almost resigned, as if she'd been expecting this moment. "Is that her?" Detective Reyes asked quietly. "Is that Lin Wei?" "Yes," Elijah said, his voice steadier than he felt. "That's Vanessa." At the sound of his voice, Vanessa's head snapped up. Their eyes met across the room, and Elijah watched as shock, then dismay, then something like anguish washed across her face. "Elijah," she whispered, the word barely audible. He moved toward her, ignoring Detective Reyes's hand on his arm. The officer beside Vanessa tensed, but didn't interfere.
Why?
Elijah asked, stopping a few feet away from her. Just one word, but it contained every question he'd been torturing himself with for months. Vanessa, Lynn, looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes swimming with tears. I never meant to hurt you, she said finally. You left a week before our wedding, Elijah said, his voice cracking despite his efforts to remain calm. Without a word. Without an explanation. You let me think something had happened to you. I couldn't face you, she admitted, a tear slipping down her cheek. I couldn't bear to see your expression when you learned the truth. What truth? That your whole life was a lie? That our relationship was part of some elaborate con? No, she said fiercely.
No, Elijah.
What we had was real. My feelings for you were real. They still are. Elijah shook his head, disbelieving. If that were true, you wouldn't have left. You wouldn't have deceived me from the beginning. I didn't plan to fall in love with you, she said, another tear following the first. It wasn't supposed to happen. You were just a client of the gallery. A potential mark initially. The word stung, but at least she was being honest now. So, when did the plan change? When did I go from mark to fiancé? The first time you made me laugh, she said simply. Really laugh, not the polite gallery laugh I'd perfected. We were talking about that ridiculous installation, the one with the taxidermied pigeons? And you leaned in and whispered something so unexpectedly funny that I laughed until I cried. And I thought, oh, this is dangerous. Elijah remembered that moment. 6 months before they'd started dating. He'd considered it the beginning of their friendship, the first crack in Vanessa's professional veneer. So, why continue the deception? He pressed. Why not tell me the truth then? How could I? She asked, her voice breaking. How do you tell someone you're falling for that your entire identity is a lie? That you're involved in criminal activity? That you've been living under a false name for years? You could have trusted me. I wanted to, she insisted. So many times I almost told you everything. But then I'd imagine your face, your disappointment, your disgust. And I couldn't bear it. So instead, you let me plan a wedding. You let me believe we had a future. I thought we could have one, she admitted quietly. I was going to leave all of this behind. Start fresh. Be Vanessa Chen for real. Be your wife. What changed? Her eyes darted toward the two men being led from the room, then back to Elijah. They found out I wanted out. They made it clear that wasn't an option. You could have gone to the police. And implicated myself? Faced prison. She shook her head. And it wasn't just about me. There are people back in China, family, who would have suffered consequences. So you ran. I ran, she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Detective Reyes approached then, her expression professional but not unkind. Ms. Wei, we need to process you now. Vanessa nodded, resigned. But before they could lead her away, she looked at Elijah one last time. For what it's worth, I was going to wear my grandmother's jade necklace at our wedding. It's the one true thing I brought with me from my old life. The one real piece of myself I wanted to share with you. It was such a small detail, so specific and unexpected, that Elijah knew it had to be true. One tiny fragment of honesty in a relationship built on lies. Goodbye, Elijah, she said softly as the officers led her toward the door. I'm sorry I couldn't be who you thought I was. As Vanessa disappeared from view, Elijah stood motionless in the center of the studio, surrounded by beautiful forgeries, perfect on the surface, hollow underneath. Just like their love had been. Or had it? Even now, he wasn't sure what to believe. 2 months later, the Hong Kong District Court was modern and austere, all clean lines and muted colors, the air conditioned to a crisp chill that made Elijah wish he'd brought a sweater. He sat in the back row of the gallery, just another spectator to most eyes, though the prosecution team knew who he was. He hadn't planned to attend the trial. After the raid, he'd returned to New York, throwing himself back into work, trying to rebuild a life without Vanessa. He'd moved to a new apartment, unable to bear the constant reminders in the old one. He'd even started dating again, awkward coffee meetings arranged by well-meaning friends that never led to second dates. But when Detective Reyes called to inform him that Lin Wei had agreed to testify against the leaders of the forgery ring in exchange for a reduced sentence, something had compelled him to book a flight back to Hong Kong. Closure, perhaps. Or maybe just masochistic curiosity. The court officer announced the next witness, and there she was. Lin Wei, formerly Vanessa Chen, wearing a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back in a low bun. She looked smaller than he remembered, more vulnerable, without her carefully constructed persona. She took the oath, her voice clear but quiet in the hushed courtroom. And then she began to testify, describing in methodical detail how the forgery operation worked, the techniques used, the network of galleries and dealers who knowingly or unknowingly moved the fakes into the legitimate art market. Elijah listened, fascinated despite himself. This was a side of Vanessa he'd never known, precise, technical, knowledgeable about aspects of art he'd never heard her discuss. She spoke of pigment compositions, canvas aging techniques, the subtle markers of brushwork that distinguished one master from another. This was her true expertise, he realized. Not curating but creating. Not selling art, but forging it. When the prosecutor asked about her recruitment into the organization, Lin hesitated for the first time. "I was a student at the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing," she said finally. "I had talent but no connections, no family wealth to support me. Wei Liang, my uncle, approached me with an opportunity. Simple copying jobs at first, nothing illegal. By the time I realized what I was truly involved in, I was already compromised." "And your move to the United States?" the prosecutor prompted. "That was Wei Liang's idea. A new identity, a position at a respected gallery. I was to identify potential clients, build relationships with collectors who might be susceptible to purchasing forgeries without too many questions." Like Elijah Mercer? The name, spoken aloud in this context, made Elijah flinch. Lin's gaze darted to the gallery for the first time, scanning the faces until she found his. Their eyes locked for a brief moment before she looked away. "No," she said firmly. "Mr. Mercer was never targeted for forgery sales. Our relationship was separate from my work." The prosecutor raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Yet you chose to become involved with a wealthy structural engineer with an interest in art. Convenient, wouldn't you say?" Lin's composure slipped, just slightly. "As I've stated in my deposition, I initially viewed Mr. Mercer as a potential contact because of his connections in the architectural world, designers and developers who might be in the market for statement art pieces. But our personal relationship developed independently. A relationship built on deception." "Objection," Lin's lawyer interjected. "Argumentative." "Sustained," the judge ruled. The questioning continued, moving into the specifics of the operation's leadership structure, the flow of money, the distribution networks. Elijah listened with half an ear, his mind caught on Lin's words. Our personal relationship developed independently. Was that true? Or just another convenient lie? After the day's proceedings ended, Elijah lingered in the courthouse lobby, not entirely sure why. He should leave, fly back to New York, continue the process of forgetting. Yet here he stood, watching the doors through which the defendants would exit. When Lin appeared, flanked by her lawyer and a court officer, she spotted him immediately. She said something to her lawyer, who frowned but nodded. The officer allowed her to approach, though he remained watchful. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, stopping a few feet away. "Neither did I," Elijah admitted. An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unasked questions and unspoken recriminations. "How long?" Elijah asked finally. "My sentence? If the plea agreement holds 3 years. Less with good behavior." And then, she shrugged slightly. "Deportation most likely. Back to China." Elijah nodded, unsure what else to say. Why had he come? What closure could possibly exist for this situation? "I kept it," Lin said suddenly, her hand moving to her throat where a thin gold chain disappeared beneath the neckline of her dress. "My grandmother's jade. They let me keep it in custody." Such a small thing to cling to, a piece of her true self when everything else had been stripped away. The things I said to you in Hong Kong, she continued, her voice low. About my feelings for you. They were true, Elijah. Whatever else I lied about, I never lied about that. Elijah wanted to believe her. Part of him still loved the woman he'd known as Vanessa, even knowing she'd never truly existed. But he'd spent months dissecting every moment of their relationship, questioning every laugh, every kiss, every whispered promise. How could he ever trust a word she said? I'm selling the engagement ring, he said instead of addressing her claim. Online auction. It seems fitting somehow. Pain flashed across her face. You have every right to hate me. I don't hate you, Elijah said, surprising himself with the truth of it. I don't know what I feel anymore. For what it's worth, Lynn said hesitantly, the woman you knew, Vanessa, she wasn't entirely fictional. She was the person I wished I could be, the person I might have been in a different life. It was both comforting and devastating to hear that parts of the woman he'd loved had been genuine, yet the whole could never have been real. I should go, Elijah said, suddenly exhausted. My flight's tomorrow morning. Lynn nodded, blinking back tears. Of course. He turned to leave, then paused. There was one question he still needed answered. That last morning, he said, turning back. When you kissed me goodbye, did you know then that you were leaving? That you'd never come back? Yes, she whispered, a tear escaping despite her efforts. I knew. Then why the text? Why say, thank you for loving me? Why not just disappear? Lynn looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Because I needed you to know that it mattered. That you mattered. That even though everything else was a lie, the fact that you loved me, that I loved you, was the most real thing in my life. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough to heal what had been broken. But it was something, a fragment of truth to carry away from the wreckage. Goodbye, Lynn, Elijah said, using her real name for the first time. Goodbye, Elijah, she replied, her voice catching. He walked away without looking back, each step putting distance between himself and the woman who had both loved him and betrayed him, who had been both real and illusion. Outside, Hong Kong's humidity enveloped him, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned sterility of the courthouse. Life continued around him, vendors selling street food, tourists taking photos, locals hurrying to their next destination. None of them knew or cared about his shattered heart, his unraveled life. His phone buzzed with an alert. The auction for the engagement ring had received its first bid. Not much, barely half what he'd paid for it, but it was a start. A concrete step toward something new. Elijah pocketed his phone and hailed a taxi. Tomorrow he would return to New York, to his job, to the process of rebuilding. The pain would fade eventually. The questions might never be fully answered. But he had this, at least, the knowledge that somewhere beneath the layers of deception, something genuine had existed between them. Love, however flawed and doomed, had been real. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an ending he could live with. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Elijah didn't look back at the courthouse where Lynn remained. Instead, he looked forward toward whatever came next.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.